Ready? Right. So we're trying to Zoom with Eddie Hobbs, and it's a lot of faffing around. And then Hannah's saying, "Send him another link," and I'm saying, "Really? Do you think that's going to help?" But you don't know.
I don't know, but
But
why
it just
not?
why not? You just feel
Why
like it's
not?
going to help.
Yeah.
And also,
And then
I
what did
start
you say? That the minute
you show up, I
okay,
start collapsing. I start not being able to
inside.
breathe properly. My throat starts to constrict. I'm like, but the minute you,
Oh.
Eddie, I'm so happy. Have we got you? Oh, there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We go. Oh,
Yeah. There you are.
yeah. Okay.
What about that little thing? Can we get rid of
No,
this?
don't worry about that, Daniel or Hannah. Sorry, that's Hannah, by the way.
Hello.
Hello, Hannah. How are you?
Hi, Eddie. I must have met you in RTE. I'm a makeup artist.
Oh, well, that would have been a while. Yeah.
Yeah, a long time ago. Yeah.
A
They
long.
drove me out onto the road Montrose and told me not a few years ago. So drop that thing off the wall behind. Is that distraction?
No, it's all blurry. Everything behind you is blurry. And maybe if you can you sort of tilt your camera so that you're more. I mean, should I say that your eye is at the top
Yeah, you
third?
closer.
Yeah, there you go. That's a more presidential.
Yeah, just give me a second.
Really bad sound.
Yeah, well, it's what we have.
But other people do Zoom and
Well,
sound
that's
is
okay.
better.
I can hear Eddie fine.
Okay, cool.
Hannah's complaining about the sound already, Eddie.
No, I'm not complaining. I'm just. Why would you use the word complain? I'm just stating.
I'm in
Sorry.
my West Cork. I was in my Kildare have green screen and all that kind of stuff, unfortunately.
Yeah, can you hear that, Daniel? Okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a little
Is the sound clipping out a little bit?
but like
Sure, fuck
hopefully,
it, we'll-
hopefully it'd be.
Yeah, Eddie. Yeah, so because I'm setting up my podcast here, and I find it very stressful, and Hannah's saying to me when Eddie comes on, let him speak. Don't talk over Eddie. Let him speak. He's got so much to say.
Yes.
So that's number one. So that stresses me out. And then also she has a water bottle and she always leaves it on the floor, Eddie, and it does my fucking head in, and it's just like put things on, the table. So that's the other thing.
I think you should say I'm a financial advisor, not a psychologist or psychiatrist.
Okay. And then anyway, so that's neither. So Eddie, you're in West Cork at the moment.
I'm in my work studio, yeah.
Okay.
I migrate down here during the first few weeks during the summer.
And you've got 4 kids.
Yeah, they're all grown up now. The youngest is 20, she's 24 on next weekend, and the fellow is 31.
Yeah. I know my eldest is 30 and
One?
what?
Daniel, are you 31?
I'm still 30.
Oh, he's still 30. He's going to be 31.
So do you want to just do a quick intro, Daniel, so we can just start?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to And That's Why We're Not Together, starring David McSavage, Hannah Andrews, and special guest Eddie Hobbs.
And I'm truly delighted to have Eddie Hobbs with us. And I think it's the first time we've done Zoom, isn't it, Hannah?
Yes.
So I feel
podcast.
it's quite awkward, Eddie, and I'd love to meet you in person because I've been a fan of yours for years. Although I'll tell you, Eddie,
Oh, thank you.
I haven't got a fucking clue about financial stuff. Well, up until recently, I've never had to worry about money because I've never had any. But recently, I've started making a bit of cash. And Jesus, I don't know. All the Well, you had a TV show. I'm sure people know, called Rip Off Republic. I mean, what are the biggest areas of things like where you see inequity and glaring mismanagement or glaring corruption?
Oh, well, I mean,
Oh, sorry. How long do we have?
No. Start there. No, let's start there. I mean, and then talk very in plain English, pragmatically to people. It's my opinion, from looking in reasonable detail for a long period of time, that Ireland is a second republic. The republic we've got is not a democracy. It's not functioning near it. We have a situation where the real power in the country it's actually not in the national chamber. We've given up sovereignty into the EU over and over again. That was apparent during the. I mean, the most did not want us to opt into the migration and the pact of the EU, and we did, and it was very because 18 TDs voted, the entire independent TDs voted no. They voted no because they were telling them we can't do this. Yet we voted. It came in because the whips got in, the Fianna Fáil, Gael, and the Greens, and they just it was won by 7 votes. Now there's still a fight to through because primary legislation come in, and it's going to create more controversy when that happens. That to me was a startling reminder that this country is not working anywhere near a democracy.
Eddie, can I just Eddie? Sorry, I'm dreadfully sorry. Yeah. I just need to interject here because I can't tell you how interested I am in what you're saying, but the sound is just clipping. So literally, this is when you talk, we hear this and then there's some kind of sound issue on you on
well,
you.
Then,
yeah, sorry.
On my side.
Yeah. And it's so frustrating. And I was thinking, just let it go. But it's literally, there's certain words that are clipping out.
Okay, well, what we'll do then is I'll go to another location. It'll take 5 minutes. And I'll set under a different Wi-Fi system, and we'll see how it works.
Yeah, Eddie, I'm just like I'm literally so excited because I really want to talk to your expertise. I've got a lot of questions, and I think people will be very excited about this. Thank you, Eddie.
Okay, well, look, it's quarter past. Say in about 5 minutes, okay? I'll connect.
Thank you so much, Eddie.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Will we resend a link, Daniel?
Yeah.
We should resend.
No, same link.
We can use the same link. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Is that okay? Yeah.
I said it.
Yeah, but I think it's better that we.
I can't understand.
No,
it's
Daniel.
impossible.
Because it's not fair. Because he's coming up.
Can we record this?
We have recorded it.
Oh, what are we saying now?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's still recording. So.
Oh, okay. So I was right. There was no need for you to shout at me.
Oh, there's a very need for you to shout at you.
And that's why we're not together. But people don't understand. Like, can you show me that water bottle, please? And I think this is really, show me that water bottle. This is unbelievable.
Okay, no, it's not unbelievable.
No, democracy.
I don't. This is more important to me. So, ladies and gentlemen,
and
here we have, and Hannah just puts this on the ground, and every time. You bang into it, you click, and I call them Hannah's landmines. I mean, all it is, put the bloody...
We are sponsored by this beautiful copper water bottle.
But I mean, just put the water bottle on a table, out of the way. But you are so stubborn. And people don't know, this is you enjoy your petty torments. I'm so upset.
No.
And then also, Daniel went to the toilet for the second time. And I said to him, in the space of 20 minutes, and I said, what, are you going for another shit? And then Hannah said, do not question my son's toilet habits.
Yes, don't cut his balls off. Don't kick him in the balls.
Should I stop recording or?
Maybe because David doesn't have anything else to say.
Yeah, I guess stop recording.
Okay.
So you reckon present day Ireland is not a democracy?
No, not. It's diminished. It's not just me saying it. I mean, independent TDs will tell you the same. And what encapsulated the vote in favour of Ireland opting to, even though we didn't have to, opting into the EU Migration Asylum Pact, which was a vote in the Dáil. All 18 TDs said no. That's all 18 because they were getting the instructions from the people directly. And the party whips said yes because they were getting writing instructions from the EU. And it was as simple as that. It was a straightforward clash between the globalists inside in the Dáil and those that aren't. And people. So what's happened over the last 20 years or so is that a large proportion of Irish sovereignty is just simply being passed up into the EU, and to the great diminution of Irish democracy. So I think what needs to happen is it needs to get together and form a second republic, because the first republic is We have a deep state really, which involves senior civil servants that are very much in the globalist agenda. We have complete absent fourth estate. It was quickly purchased during the Q1 2020, during the whole COVID in inverted commas problem, and hasn't come back since. So they're not being challenged. They're simply just an arm of the state now. That's quite clear from. It's also quite clear from the vote on the 8th of March, when the commentariat and the politicians all told, majority told people to vote in favour of the amending the constitution, and the Irish people said, we've had enough of this. Well, and yet we continued on. Then we opted into the migration pact. So I think it's broken.
Again, I just want people to be mindful that I'm sure you're all very interested, as I am, in what Eddie is saying, but there's certain words that are clipping out. So I hope we'll just struggle through it and hang in there. But you wrote
maybe a quick look at at my end is okay, I on both systems.
Well, we did a test before we talked to you. So you wrote a book called Own Our Oil, right?
Yeah.
Now, I remember reading about this, and I don't know. I mean, it was so shocking. Like, we could have, what Norway did, we sort of farmed it all out, didn't we? Any prospective profits or ownership of our own of oil or gas resources. Sorry, yeah.
Well, if we go back time a little bit, I think it would probably nail it for you. 1922 Constitution, our great-grandfathers and great-grandmothers insisted on a control over the national parliament, whereby the people, if you got a petition of more than 75,000 people, could actually put a vote to themselves. It was called Article 48 of the 1922 Constitution, and that was the control that the fathers, basically, of Ireland decided to put in place, so that the people were in control. Now, some people find concepts when they hear them for the first time, well, what happened to that? And the answer was taken out during the 1920s, because those that got involved in the National Chamber decided we can't have the people with a kind of a direct democracy control like that. And this was the equivalent of, in the United States, of the First Amendment, to bear arms, except that what was given to Ireland was to bear your pen. You could actually go and vote. And the reason this was taken, if this had been in place, the bank bailout wouldn't have happened. And the events which you've asked about, which is our natural resources, that wouldn't have happened. I'll come back to that in a second. And we would have opted into the EU asylum pact either, because the national parliament would know, Jesus, if this goes to the people, going to reject it, so let's not put it to them. So it's a kind of a self-policing mechanism. We don't have that. So when you look at the Irish Constitution, the preamble to the Constitution is us, the Irish people, and we create the state by hundreds of years, giving our instructions to the state. The rest of the Constitution are our instructions on how the place should be run. But we're supposed to own it and run it. Now, before the 1922 Constitution, when we were in the British Empire, we actually had more ownership of our natural resources, our oil, gas, the air, our lakes, our water, on that under the Magna Carta since June 1215, when it was signed by by King John at the time in Runnymede, just south of London. So we owned our natural resources, and we're the only people, I believe, in Europe that actually have been alienated from our natural resources. And that was done by De Valera when he designed the 1937 Constitution. And what he did was really Jesuital. It was quite sneaky, this. And only the Jesuits that spotted it, incidentally. What he did was he made it the guardian of all our natural resources. But they made it non-justicable through the courts. In other words, the people couldn't take the state to court for its poor stewardship of natural resources or for giving them away. So basically, the state, in inverted commas, doesn't own our natural resource, effectively does. Now, that's why when all the water protests were going on, I was blue in the face trying to tell the leaders, look, you're focusing on the wrong issue. The issue is we actually own our own natural resources. And that article, I think it was Article, come to me in a moment, Article 10 of the Constitution needs to be reversed. And Article 5, the non-justicable bit. So the Irish people, as we speak, we don't own our natural resources. We're the only country in Europe that don't own our natural resources. We have a parliamentary system that doesn't to the people, except occasionally. And we don't have a fourth estate. That all died because of the COVID response. I'm quite happy to go with that in great detail. That's what happened. So we don't have anybody holding the to account publicly. It's all impossible to set up a new political party. It's rigged to stop it from happening. So this is what we've got, and that's why I think we need to have a conversation about having a second republic, like the French have done several times.
It's just. Can you hear?
I can hear much better, but it's like you really have to listen
because we're missing out. Yeah. What could it have been like? The Norway model. Did we at the time defer or talk to anybody in Norway? Did they give us advice? And if we had followed the way Norway seemed to have ownership of their own natural resources, how would the country have benefited? How would Ireland be different as a result if we had followed what Norway had done?
Well, what Norway was, when Norway was studied at the time by Minister Justin Keating, who was a humanist, a vet, a farmer, and a minister, and a broadcaster, multi-talented man. He looked very closely at what Norway did. And what happened in Norway was that a Labour government came in the early 1970s, and the senior person involved, a Norwegian, spoke to the American, I think it was Marathon Oil at the time, and basically said, I'm changing the rule book. I'm throwing it all out. From now on, the Norwegian people are going to percentage of everything that comes out of Norwegian waters, off the top line, not off the bottom line. It's a profit thing, off the top line, revenues, gross revenues. We're going to own the pipes going in and out of our country, out to these oil fields. And on top of that, we're going to tax your profits. And the Americans went bananas. And he had them back in 2 weeks later negotiating. The negotiating then meant that Statoil was set up, which is a Norwegian company, and the Americans were forced to train and pass their know-how to Statoil, and Statoil owned all the pipes going out to the oil fields. Now, the irony was that at the time in the late 60s, the Americans had, and it's in writing in the regulatory office of the Norwegian oil regulator, a letter saying that there's no oil here, and offering them, I think it was $50,000 a month for the entire thing, the entire offshore fields. And it was down, of course, thanks be to God, for the Norwegians, and they now have a sovereign wealth fund in Norway, which is the reverse of our national debt. The sovereign wealth fund in Norway, the last time I looked at it, was over €1 trillion, which means that every single person in Norway has the equivalent of €1 million worth of value inside in their sovereign wealth fund from one person making the right decision and forcing it through in the early 1970s. Now, what we had is the reverse. We had a situation where Justin Keating tried to put that model in place, and it was all unravelled by a Fianna Fáil minister, Burke, who went into meetings without his civil servants, which he's not supposed to do, to talk to the oil companies, and suddenly we had a different pricing model, and one which didn't give anything off the top line, or wouldn't give anything off the top line if there was fines on in Irish waters. Ray Burke was the minister involved, and it's quite clear to me what happened. And Ray Burke did well out of it, no doubt about that.
Ray Burke did what? He got money from the companies.
I've no doubt, but that Ray Burke received money to do this from the oil companies. Yeah.
So one man, rather than do right by the population, his fellow countrymen and women, decided to line his own pockets. That's quite reprehensible, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, we know the character we're dealing with, and they, that's what he did at the time. He was the diametric opposite of the Labour senior civil servant that came in and stood up against the American oil interests at the time. On a course.
Do we have similar natural resources in comparison to Sorry.
Well, that's an open question. The Norwegians obviously have a rich oil and gas field, just like the North Sea was for Britain. We apparently have one as well, but there haven't been any major finds. because there hasn't a need to be. Ireland is a frontier location, potentially for oil and gas exploration, but all of that now being attacked by the green agenda, which is something we can also get into, because that's just another load of nonsense. In my opinion, the whole UN IPCC was set up by the Rockefeller Foundation back in the day. And it was set up, it was just like COVID, it was set up to keep people in fear of an imaginary bogeyman. And the whole green industry is based around it now. And it's an unstoppable train. Trying to get to net zero is nonsense. And
by the year 30, it's crazy.
Yeah, but people know this anyway, Hannah. I mean, look, just on a basic level, if you look at an EV, an electric vehicle, and you take into account it's the full cost of the whole thing from the time that it's been built and put together, or by the way, which has been burning energy largely from fossil fuels, which is still around 82% of the entire global fuel supply is fossil fuels. We're being told that that this is the best thing since sliced bread. But when you look at the cost of getting rid of the stuff at the other end, when these EVs fail, and they fail because there's no second-hand value for a lot of them. I mean, any car salesperson will tell you that. And people think they're driving around in this illusion that they're suddenly part of the green economy. They aren't.
Well, I assume
based on fossil fuels.
I assume electric vehicles will just evolve and become more viable, maybe.
I don't know, but isn't it very political about electric vehicle? I heard that the lifespan is about 10 years, and after 7 years, maybe if they don't, fail until then you can have that they have some sort of sense that they exist, that they zero emission then.
Huh?
After 7 years of using electric vehicle.
I mean, it's the same with
but I think it's even stretched.
It's the same with the windmills, the blades have a certain lifespan as well, and then there's nothing that can be done with them other than bury them in the ground. And so this idea that it's suddenly green, people have to stand back. I mean, for me, what's happened to a large degree is that people have almost lost their critical thinking faculty in a lot of cases, to question these things.
Well, that's interesting, Eddie. Questioning things nowadays, it's funny. I mean, when I was growing up, you could have, I'm not sure if it was as rosy as I'm going to paint it, but I mean, you can have disagreements. Eddie has an opinion, Hannah has an opinion. We all have different opinions, but we can peacefully coexist. And we don't have to try and shut each other down. But it seems to be that window is narrowing. It's getting smaller. Like people really, especially even during the COVID thing. Like Hannah didn't want our children, our boys, to be vaccinated. I didn't care really, but Hannah was very adamant about it, which I thought. But I admired her for going against the prevailing sentiment. But the idea even to question it at the time seemed, sacrilegious.
Well, I've spent the last 3.5 years trying to figure all that out in detail at source level, and I've given public lectures on it at this stage for the findings. So I try and give you the summary of that pretty quickly. Firstly, there's lots of questions that the media in Ireland have never gone near, and they won't go near it because it's absolutely taboo. It's the same thing is happening on all social media platforms with the exception of X. And that's that it's the algorithms go around and deplatform or cancel any counter science. I'm not talking now about people like me. I mean talking about scientists. Counter science is cancelled. People have lost their licenses, for example, in the medical profession for standing up, and
or for questioning, even.
For questioning and standing up. I mean, if you just look at some of the big questions, the first question, just look at a series of questions. The first question is, why was the definition of a pandemic changed in 2009? And people don't even realize it was, because it was never discussed in the mainstream media. Actual fatality level, the fatality feature, the number of dead to be required before it would become a pandemic, was taken out. And so was morbidity. So in other words, the number of people that couldn't turn up and work, that was taken out. It just purely became about the infection level. That's very strange, isn't it? And the WHO up until this point, by the way, this is the WHO basically is financed by the pharmaceutical industry, and the biggest player in that, of course, is Bill Gates and the Gates Foundation. And Gates' own foundation puts about €1 in every 5 through the World Health Organization. The idea that somehow this is for the people of the world is may have been in the past, but it's absolute nonsense now. This is a public-private corporation.
What is WHO? WHO.
WHO. It's based in Geneva, and David, and what a lot of people don't know about it is that it's completely immune from any criminal prosecution for any decisions that it makes.
But,
And
people argue, but people argue that it's an institution and it does not have a right in any country, but somehow all the countries are listening to what they say, So they have no...
Well, that's because, yeah. But Hannah, you have to be careful of looking just purely at structures. You have to look behind the structure and say, where's the power here? Not where is the structure, where's the power? Because the structure can be there to distract. Now, what we do know is that the WHO, on the June weekend this summer, they attempted to land a global technocracy.
Sorry,
which would have given them...
Oh yeah, there it is. Sorry, Eddie. Oh no,
yeah.
Sorry. Just 2 seconds, Daniel. How do I can't see what I'm doing here? It just said it's going to end in 10 minutes, and then I pressed a button. Oh Christ Almighty, Eddie! Just 2 seconds.
If it does, you can keep going.
Yeah. What's that? Can you come over here, Daniel? I can't see. You see, I'm fucking blind. Well, I'm sorry, Daniel. I don't.
Why did you press?
I don't know because there was a big thing on the screen. See that? My son is here to help.
Hi, Daniel.
Oh, there he is. Okay, so this is going to end in 10 minutes.
But we can maybe redo the link.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, you can redo the link. Yeah.
Okay, and then that'll be it then, Eddie. We don't want to keep too much of your time.
No problem.
Sorry, but okay.
No.
Well, just to it's so interesting that you're all over this. You've really you know the story of this. I mean, it really is. Usually we have to wait for 20 or 30 years, and then movies start getting made, and we find out the exact thing that happened. But what if it's all a planned exercise, or it was created, or there was all this obfuscation that they said, well, no, what's the thing called? COVID-19 came from somebody fucking a bat in a wet food market or whatever the fuck, in other words, that so it was what whoever planned the thing, like, what do they want? What
very good question. Let me walk you through it backwards from where we are, maybe to the origin, which will help. But let's just get to just saying there that the definition of pandemic itself was lowered, so that if you look at the system.
So somebody had a meeting. They had a meeting. Hi guys, how you doing? We're going to rejig the definition of a pandemic, and what would be the purpose of doing that?
Well, if your source is the pharmaceutical industry, then you have to look behind the pharmaceutical industry, which I'll come to in a moment. But the pharmaceutical industry can then basically print money, because they can create a pandemic by lowering the definition of a pandemic. Then I'll come back to. Well, let me just deal with how it's created. So we've had bioweapons since the time of the Mongols. That's how the Black Death happened. There was a Mongol besieged a city in Crimea.
Hannah's a Mongol.
I have some Mongol blood.
They flung infected bodies over the battlements.
Okay.
And infected the population, and then the Italians left. And they got on their ships and they sailed back to Italy, and they brought the bubonic plague with them. That was the first evidence of it, and we've had it all the ways long. The British used it to create disease amongst Indians when they were fighting them in North America back in the 1700s, and so it goes on through to the First World War. Then there was a bioweapons international treaty to say after the First World War we must stop this.
Nixon threw it out in the 1970s and said, "This is crazy. What are we doing? Investing time and energy in bioweapons research," which is what the Americans were doing when they pulled in a whole pile of Japanese and Nazi scientists into America after the end of the Second World War, and they set up a bioweapons lab in Maryland in a place called Fort Detrick. And so it was stopped at that stage, but then it restarted as soon as Nixon was got out of the way. And off it went again. And Obama got hold of it, and he said, "No, we can't have bioweapon labs on the soil of the United States." So what they did was they said, well, in the International Bioweapons Treaty, you see, there was a ban on bioweapons in war, but they made one small little adjustment to say, but by the way, you're allowed manipulate pathogens and make them what they call a gain of function, but actually it's weaponize them for the purposes of scientific research into vaccines against the very pathogens that you're making. And that's what the Wuhan Institute of Virology was in Wuhan. It was an outsourced American investment. And the person who outsourced it is Anthony Fauci, who Micheál Martin medalled here a couple of months ago. I gave him a medal from the doctors in Ireland. Fauci. And Fauci was the head regulator in the United States for decades. And Fauci's system was set up such that the senior officers of the regulator themselves could benefit from patent income for the vaccines that were created by weaponizing these pathogens. So so what happened was when Obama banned it, what Fauci organized is that for the money to transfer over through an organization called the Eco Health Alliance, run by a guy called Daszak, and he gave the money, he gave the finance through the Wuhan Institute of Virology, headed up by the lady who was known as the Bat Lady, Shi Zhenli. And the actual scientific breakthrough, which created the weaponization of the pathogen, was actually designed by a guy called Ralph Barrick, who was a PhD in a university in South Carolina. And his patent, which went through from 2015 to 2017, was handed over to Xi Jinping's team, and that's how they weaponized it. And Fauci knows all this. He denied he even knew Ralph Barrick in subsequent testimony to the U.S. to U.S. Congress. So,
weaponized a virus.
Yes. So
you're definitely sure that this was not some organic virus that happened, evolved.
Well, everybody knows.
I'm only asking.
It's a very good question. It's a very good question, David. We have all of this highly documented, thanks to the Trojan work of a big team of people led by Robert F. Kennedy in his book, The Wuhan Cover-Up, and his previous book, The Real Anthony Fauci. So there's about 700 pages, about 65 chapters in his second book, leading up to the World Health Organization.
So this is this is a continuation of bioweapon research. And they didn't want it happening in the United States, so they outsourced it to this place in Wuhan, but under the auspices of Obama, or did he not know about it?
No, he banned it.
Obama banned it. He banned further bioweapon research on the soil of the United States, so they simply moved it off the soil.
So he did know. He did know about it. I mean, this was given the green light by Obama.
Because it's a central part of the American industrial military complex. That's what it is, and the U.S. pharmaceutical industry is an extension of it. You're beginning to join the dots.
But it doesn't seem in terms of bioweapons, it's not, you know when you think of anthrax and you think of all these other weapons, it's not the kind of weapons that you're going to drop on an army and they'll start, getting flu symptoms over weeks.
But apparently American soldiers were made to take anthrax vaccines or shots.
I'm just saying, so what would be the point of COVID-19 as a bioweapon? I mean, it's not I see what you mean. They're just experimenting and this thing.
Correct.
Okay. So they were trying to make something more deadly, possibly, or...
Well, it looks that way. Remember, a lot of this is covered in fog because there's been propaganda spinning and cover-up. Now, we know there was a cover-up because in late January 2020, Fauci was on a call with Sir Jeremy Farrar, who was then the head of the fourth largest endowment in the world, also another huge investor in the pharmaceutical industry, and also indirectly invested through the Wuhan Institute of Virology infrastructure. And they were determining whether this was actually a bat that came from this cave or whether it was actually a leak from the lab. Now, these labs are notoriously leaky anyway. And the two areas where the US bioweapons industry was outsourced to was China and the Wuhan lab. And guess where? Guess what other country? For 2 marks.
Where?
Ukraine.
Ukraine.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. So,
Are you looking at, are we running
so-
out of time here? Oh, we are. We've got 1 minute left, Daniel. Daniel?
Yeah, you got 1 minute left. Yeah, but we can reconnect the meeting if needs be.
Yeah.
Same link.
Yeah.
Can we
That's fine.
can we redo it with the same link, Daniel?
I don't know if the same
No.
link, but I can.
Similar.
Yes, you can. Yeah,
Or you can?
you can. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So what will we do then? We'll just will you clock out, Eddie, and then re.
Yeah. Well, if it times out, I'll just come back in on the same link 2 minutes later.
Okay, cool. Because it's
Yeah,
fascinating.
no, it's great, Eddie. It's like it's like a Netflix film. It's so
Let me
exciting.
finish.
Oh, sorry.
Let me finish the story. I'm simplifying it. Let
Well,
me
the
finish
only
story
reason
for you, right?
because I don't want you to get cut off. I want to capture the whole thing, and it's less than a minute now, so that's why I'm just saying rather than cut
Yeah.
you off
Right,
okay.
mid
So
sentence.
you start on the, but what I'm saying, what I want to say, that it just amazes me that David is listening now. Whenever I,
See. Well, I'm listening, but I don't know if it's true.
well,
Okay, where was he? Where was he? He was saying, oh, yeah, Ukraine.
Ukraine, that they outsource labs.
Yeah, so
I so now the sound is good, thank God. We're lucky. But that early sound, it was absolute torture.
Did we do something, or was
No, we didn't. Did we, Daniel?
no, it just sort of corrected
itself.
Yeah. Yeah.
It could.
Well, we have to get, pay for the
yeah,
meeting. I'll pay.
100%.
Yeah.
What are you doing?
I'm scratching me. Scratching my undercarriage.
Well,
That
you
was,
would.
that was on film.
Did you record it?
It's funny, God, you see guys in public literally with their hands down their pants, just
Yeah,
walking
especially
around.
younger guys. I mean,
I
it's,
see Jack at it as well. It's unbelievable.
oh, it's disgusting.
You know, call me old-fashioned.
Yeah, do everything you want to do at home.
Yeah, well, I'm just gonna.
Oh, yeah. So you were saying they have another lab in Ukraine.
Well, allegedly, I mean that we know about the Wuhan lab, but yeah, I mean it looks as if Ukraine has had U.S. bioweapons research labs as well. Now they come at different standards of security, and there's always been concerns about leaks from labs. I mean it's an ongoing concern in the bioweapons industry. No, they don't call it that themselves; they call it gain of function. But I mean it's clearly part of the bioweapons research, and that's why. And let me just explain that in a second. So. But at the end of January, then there is an attempt to suggest that the actual source of the leak of the infection actually is coming from some bat. But what wasn't explained to people is that the actual cave itself. Are you getting me here?
Yeah, it's strobing again. It's like, you know, we really want to hear every word, and it's like torture slightly. But that's maybe that's the conspiracy. That's, you know, the powers that be sense that something good is happening, and they're assassinating our potential to do well. Fucking typical bastards.
Well, do you want me to continue?
Well, I'm just hoping that it'll right itself, because it was fine for a good period of time, and then I think maybe that this could be the fact that you were saying they're trying to push the Zoom Pro thing, where they want you to sign up, and then they'll make it a better connection, maybe, or something. Oh no, that doesn't make sense. Why would they do that?
Well, you never know. But let's continue on. So there was a suggestion then that there wasn't a suggestion. There was an attempt to cover up the potential that this was a lab leak in January 2020, and that was organised by a team of people which included Fauci, and they were trying to. The cover story was that a bat had flown. What people weren't explained about this was a bat had flown 1,000 miles. 1,000 kilometers, which is the distance between this particular cave and Wuhan, had flown across China by 1,000 kilometers, didn't infect anybody en route, landed in the wet market, how very convenient, and infected somebody in the wet market, and then they could blame it on the Chinese, the barbaric practice of eating animals that had been kind of shot in the wild, and or farmed in the wild, and that was the cover story.
And
the
people
fact that
believed it.
Oh yeah, because it was pushed out through the propaganda. But you have to remember that this was an orchestrated media and pharmaceutical complex is under the control of the bioweapons military industrial complex. I mean, they own the media. That's quite clear. I mean, it wasn't just the only incidents over the period of the last few years, but it was quite clear that it was an orchestrated global propaganda. Psychological operations were being applied. Now, this isn't my research. I mean, I'm just reading detailed research by people like Professor David Hughes of the Institute of the Lincoln University. He's an international relations expert. He's studied this over the last 3.5 years. I've interviewed him on my own channel, Counterpoint, and that you have to have on your safety belts listening to him, because he's really getting into it. So this was orchestrated. I thought during half this period that it was happenstance. It was just the coming together of various interests, but it wasn't actually. It was highly orchestrated, control of the large parts of the media, and especially in Ireland as well. I mean, it's quite clear there was no independent media left, because they weren't dealing with any of these things. The things that I've outlined today to you are facts, none of which has been covered by the national media, and they won't cover it. They won't allow the stuff to be written in their newspapers. They won't give interviews, and neither will RT or News Talk. They just won't cover it. It's taboo, because they've been purchased, just like everybody else has in the media, as part of the control of the information flow to the public. And Ireland is one of the most backward countries in the world when it comes to the public understanding what's going on, such as the control of the media here, indirect control through the flooding of money through to the media during the period.
Well, it does tell you though how compliant we are, or humans are. And it only takes a very small percentage of people who are active and militant to change things whichever way they want.
Well, yeah, I mean, this has all been studied as well, David, by a guy called Matthias Desmet. He's professor at the University of Ghent, which is he's written a book about mass psychosis and how it's formulated and how it was applied in this particular case, and how susceptible populations are to it. We always thought it was just a German issue. It's not. It's a global issue. It happened everywhere. Basically, the basic science is that about 20% of the population become the Kobadistas in this case, or the SS back in the day, or the NKVD back in the Russian days. The formation of these totalitarian regimes relies on them, and that's been studied by Hannah Arendt, who's widely quoted by Professor Matthias Desmet in his work. And it's subsequently studied in detail by Professor David Hughes of Lincoln University when he was researching all of this, because he's an expert on looking at psychological operations as part of military weapons, and how torture is actually done to the individual, how you break an individual using these techniques, but then how it's applied to populations. And that's what happened here. 60% then of the population generally smell a rat. They know it's not right, but they keep their heads down because they're compromised, or they're afraid, or they're actually benefiting from supporting the establishment line. And then about 20% of the population see through it like looking through a pane of glass, and know it's nonsense, and they know it's bullshit, and they call it out. And in the old days, in the totalitarian regimes of the last century, they get targeted and wiped out.
Well, is it possible?
That's what happens to them.
Is it possible? Sorry, Eddie. Is it possible that there's, the two things can be true? Like, I mean, there's part of what you're saying is true, and then part of what people believe is true. I mean, the way you talk about it, the way Hannah talks about it, it's like there was an actual group of people interested, people who sort of planned the whole thing. I mean, it seems impossible.
That's the but see, that's the subtext to your question, and I know it's mind blowing when you get into it for the first time.
Maybe that's what it is. Maybe it's mind blowing. I think that's what people just dismiss it because they can't believe that people could come up with something as nefarious as this, as complicated, and would have as much power as you were saying.
Well, I'll walk you through that, because I've been sitting where you've been sitting and saying that couldn't be possible. It's not possible. And unfortunately, the more I got into it, the more it was clear that that's exactly what has happened. It wasn't just happenstance. And let me just walk you through and get to the conclusion about what's the agenda and who's behind the agenda. But first, let's just go back to Mein Kampf, written by Adolf Hitler when he was in jail in the early 1920s in Germany. And in Mein Kampf, he basically said that that people will quickly see the small lie, but they actually psychologically cannot grasp the big lie. And the bigger the lie, the easier it is to implement. And he went on and proved that hypothesis by blaming the troubles of the German people on a proportion of the population, and not only the Jews, but also the people that were disabled.
Sorry, that was Hitler. Hitler came up with that philosophy.
Yes, that's totalitarianism in action.
I wonder how did he figure that out? Oh, I'm sure he got it from other people. I mean, I can't, huh?
It's the classic playbook of totalitarianism. So what happens is that what Matthias Desmet explains is that when about 20% of your population are feeling alienated, they don't feel part of the mainstream, they're frustrated, they have unvented anger, they feel dislocated from society, and they then get free-floating anxiety. They're anxious, they don't know why they're anxious, they just are. And along comes a strong voice to say, over here, these people over here, this particular thing over here, is a source of it's the source of your anxiety. Basically, don't use words like that. And suddenly it galvanizes them. They now have an actual issue that they can get behind, and they become they were the SS back in the day, and they were the COVIDistas during lockdown. They were the people that were telling you, you're not 2 meters back, where's your mask? They were completely indoctrinated by the propaganda, and still are. You still see them walking around wearing masks, see people cycling, people driving cars wearing masks.
I lived in Tokyo for a year and a half back in the early 90s, and people a lot of people wore masks on the subway when they had colds.
Yep. The science. There's no science behind. Masks are pretty ineffective, but they're really a sideshow. The purpose of the mask, really, during COVID, was to demonstrate your compliance with the rules. It actually became about the matter that it was not scientific. It was because you were showing, I'm compliant here. I'm a
good citizen.
And then we got together then and we sang this idiotic song, Jerusalem, in uniform, in fucking empty hospitals. We had the Gardaí dancing around as well out in beaches. I mean, this was demonstrating.
It's funny, Eddie. I just have to tell you, as a podcaster, right? So I'm sitting here, and I want to hear every word from your side, from what you're saying, and the connection. It's kind of like a metaphor for our struggles. I'm trying to listen, and it's just. Can you? How are you finding it? We can hear Eddie now perfectly, but but I just think it's quite metaphorical. I'm just mindful of how much time we have and how soon this is going to run out. Can I just completely switch, even though I don't want to? I want to continue this, and I have so many questions, and it's just so unfair, and it so tortures this form of communication. But there you go. What about why are Irish people so obsessed with house ownership, Eddie? Can you hear me? Oh yeah.
I can.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, firstly, the alternative is that they'd have to be obsessed with equities and bonds, and they're not. Only a very small proportion of the Irish population have the first idea or understanding of the bond market or the equity market. So property has been the way for people to emerge from working classes and middle class backgrounds and to become financially independent. And there is a cultural thing, I think, that goes back to the days when we weren't allowed to own land. We didn't have the vote, remember, until the great Catholic emancipation from O'Connell.
But it seems to be the safest route. It seems to be the safest route for the average guy here or
No, that's
lady.
that's the perception.
That's the perception.
That's the perception. That's not the reality. I mean, the return on equities is higher, but if people don't want to wear those pajamas. They're much more comfortable in property. Property is your only man, but property is actually a high risk asset because people leverage it, and that's not it should be well understood now after the collapse of Ireland, because we bet it all on property. And then when people made their money from property, they took their winnings and they bought the shares in AIB, Bank of Ireland and Anglo-Irish Bank.
Right.
And they lost it all over again because they doubled up on their risk. They were taking their money from an area of concentrated risk, which is leveraged returns on property, and then putting it into the banks that were actually lending the money into the same area of risk. It's contrary to all financial risk.
I have no idea what leverage means, Hannah.
What do you mean?
Borrowing. In other words,
did you understand, Eddie?
Yes.
And the banks.
God, this is
Yeah. Leveraging is just a fancy term for your money and the bank's money.
Okay.
And, so people were putting down 10% of the property and borrowing 90%. So that's leveraging. That's a leverage return, and it works fantastically well if the asset is rising, and it's an absolute catastrophe when the asset collapses. That's leverage. The law of leverage.
So I just listen. This is a very anecdotal feeling that I have, and again, to me, this is such a metaphor for my understanding of Eddie Hobbs and people like Eddie who have a financial expertise. Because this is actually in action what it's like to be inside my brain when somebody's talking about financial stuff. Is they might as well be going because that's kind of what the connection is like. Anyway. What I see, to me, I see a lot of guys and men and women, they buy this house, rent it out, buy another house, rent it out, and they sort of, move around Dublin with the big bunch of keys and a car and, collect rent. And that seems to be one of the most popular entrepreneurial visions. Is that wrong? And also, renting out and dividing the house into shitty little apartments. And taking advantage of students' need for a place to live and all that. What, Hannah?
I let Eddie to answer, but I think this is changing. There's more and more vulture found, isn't it?
Wait, go on, Hannah. Sorry, Eddie.
Yeah, no, Hannah's correct. Yeah, it is changing, but I mean, like that, I don't regard that as entrepreneurial. That's just leveraging up on property. Anybody can do it. It doesn't take much of a brain. It just takes a particular attitude. Not everybody has that attitude in them. I don't have it in me. I'm able to match curtains with carpets, so I'd make a poor landlord.
What do you mean match curtains? What?
Yeah,
no, but
he's saying that he's not wanting to do it in a funny way. He's not willing to do it. He's got other ways of being entrepreneurial, isn't it so?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So when you the big question you're asking is why do people do it? It's very, very easy to understand. Leaving aside the cultural, the fact that we were alienated from property until reasonably recent generations because of the laws that were being applied to the Catholic Irish, to the peasantry back in the day, and all of the bad stuff that happened there. It's because if you look at Ireland today, only 7%, 7 out of every 100 workers in the private sector, in the private economy, actually have a guaranteed pension. Only 7. Most people have none. And those that have something don't have enough. So the way they try to secure their future is by generating rental income from property, because they know, well, at least I can do that. The only workforce in the country that is 100% protected with pensions are those working in the public sector. So they have 100% protection because it's guaranteed. There's no investment fund. You just have the money taken out of your salary, and the rest of it is covered by the taxpayer. And it's as soon as you get a job, it's it's yours until you reach your mid-80s and you die on average, depending on whether you're male or female, within a couple of years of one another on average. But for everybody else, they have to build up assets themselves, because otherwise they'll simply be reliant on the old age pension, which is going to thin because of the mathematical imbalance in the system. People know this kind of stuff. They might know it at the level I might know it, but they know it instinctively. So they go and they borrow money, they buy property, then they get another one and another one, and their hope is that by the time they reach retirement age, that the rental income from the property will look after their old age. That's the plan, and that they can transfer some assets to their children. That's the way they've been doing it for generations.
And it has worked, I assume, for generations, right?
Well, it didn't work in 2000. It didn't work in 2009 to 2015. I mean, we collapsed.
Yeah.
Our banks were wiped out. There was hundreds of billions lost in wealth in Ireland by the people that did all this. They lost it. Bankruptcies, suicides. We then brought in an Insolvency Act in 2012, which was jimmied by the banks through the Department of Finance to make sure it wouldn't be effectual, which was true. And we just kept people trapped in debt, and they're still fighting the vulture funds and the banks. And we now discovered that the vulture funds themselves have been going into court under false pretenses, making fraudulent claims that they actually own the property or they have the rights to the property when they don't in law. And the problem that has now created is such a massive problem that the judiciary themselves don't even want to touch it because they allowed it to happen. The main accountancy firms are aware of this problem. Ed Honohan has been trying to highlight it, by the way, the former what was he, president of the High Court, and but this is true. And you know what happened in Ireland during those days was absolutely appalling. I was trying to argue at the time that we needed to bring in a proper modern way of dealing with the indebtedness of people and getting them back on their feet again in society. But you may as well have been pissing into the wind. The Department of Finance was completely behind the banks. They were being looked after, and they were going to bloody make sure that the Insolvency Act didn't give consumers, the indebted consumers, too much power at all. And that's turned out to be the case. I was so annoyed about it at the time that I wrote a piece for the Wall Street Journal, and they went heavy on it. And it really got up the nose of the establishment in Ireland, especially the economists, because I'm not an economist, and they were shocked that somebody like me was writing in the Wall Street Journal. How dare he? And I was describing Ireland as a crony democracy, where the banks were leaning over the shoulders of government.
What year was this? What year was this, Eddie?
2012.
Right.
And where the banks were leaning over the shoulders of government to make sure the Insolvency Act was jimmied, and the trade union godfathers were basically writing checks to themselves through a diminishing pot to make sure that they were protected, which turned out to be the case. And it basically was a Vichy government under the complete control of its creditors in the EU, which turned out to be the case, and that is unchanged. And I got into right trouble because of the headline the Wall Street Journal editors put on it. Which was unfortunate. It was probably a bit too strong. But then I was asked to come in. I was invited into a TV3 interview with what's her name, former Minister Fine Gael, Minister Fitzgerald was the presenter, and I was told by the producer minutes before I went on that she was really annoyed that I didn't wear the green jersey, and she was going to admonish me. And I remember saying to the producer, I said, "Well, I hope you'll be ready for what will happen." And he looked at me and said, "What do you mean?" I said, "I mean, if she does that," I said, you'll be peeling her off the floor.
Mm.
And he said, it's too late to stop her. And I said, "Isn't that great?"
Mm.
And I went into studio. First question I was asked was about the Wall Street Journal piece and blah, 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 blah. And I looked at her and I said, "I find it amazing that I'm in here on so-called private sector television being interviewed by a former Minister for Justice about a matter that I wrote in a newspaper. And you're admonishing me and you're presenting in here on private sector television, and you're already on a pension of around 71,500 euros per annum." And she flapped around looking for the ejection button to try and jettison me out of the studio. She got such a shock that I discussed her pension openly with her on private sector television. And she got such a shock she could hardly continue asking me any further questions about the interview with the Wall Street Journal.
Okay. Well, I mean, she wasn't prepared, I guess, or she obviously looked down on you and didn't think you would, confront her.
That's not the point, David. Like this is supposed to be the alternative to RTE.
Yeah.
And it had an establishment figure doing its current affairs program midweek.
Former
minister.
Eddie,
makes no sense.
When was the housing bubble crash? When did that happen? What year was that?
Well, you could trace it. Well, it depends on how far back you want to go, but it was quite clear 2005. When I was doing Rip Off Republic in 2005, it was quite clear even then that we were getting into very serious trouble because of private sector credit growth. In other words, the debt levels amongst people were growing to an astronomical level. David McWilliams, in fairness to him, was very strident on it as well, saying this is unsustainable, and he was being, he was being described as a stop clock, and
he was being described as a stop clock because what do you mean by that?
Because it hadn't happened yet.
Right. So
because the collapse hadn't happened yet, and Bertie Ahern gave an address to his favourite audience, the trade unions, up in a conference in Donegal, and described people who are criticising or pointing out the weakness of all of this as I don't know why they don't just commit suicide. That's what he said.
And the film was it with there was a film called Margin Call. I'm sure you saw it, Eddie. Did you see it?
That was afterwards, yeah.
And there was another film about the guy called Burry. He created financial instruments whereby he bet that the housing crisis the housing market would collapse, and he made what was the name of that film?
I don't know.
Anyway,
I can't remember the name of the film, but I did see it. But that was post the collapse. That was post the global financial collapse.
Well, that was I know the film was made about the financial collapse.
But
though.
the roots predate the collapse. The collapse was the end stage of something that had grown out of control on Wall Street and in Europe and in Ireland for a prolonged period of time. What wasn't understood at the time was all of the interconnections underneath the surface between banks on one side of the Atlantic and the other. So when the collapse came, we actually didn't know which banks were stable and which were unstable. We didn't know where the disease had spread to, because they had taken all the bad debt in America and wrapped it into funds, and then these funds were bought then as defensive assets by banks throughout the world, not realizing the fact that they weren't buying defensive assets, they were buying gelignite.
So I mean, historically, there seems to be these cycles. And would people like yourself would have felt it at the time? Because I remember at the time, there was just this great feeling that Ireland was on the rise finally, and it would never, it was such a heady time. But you could see the writing on the wall.
Well, when I did Rip Off Republic that time, I mean, I wrote the whole thing around the fact that that Ireland, I was pointing out how protectionism in Ireland and how it worked, and I described that development was the only game in town, and that Ireland was eating its young, and all of this kind of stuff. And Bertie Ahern, who was the minister who was the Taoiseach at the time, came out and described me as a non-factual person.
Yeah.
And in other words, that was civil service speak for a liar. And I was invited to come before a Dáil committee literally within a week or two of the final programme of Rip Off Republic. The Dáil committee was going to examine me, and this was headed up by the Fianna Fáil minister in the Senate at the time. And when the media contacted me and said, this is going to happen, I said, how many are on the committee? And they told me, I don't know, it was 8 or 9 or 10 or something like that. And I said, that's very unfair. I said, they're going to need all of them. And it's going to be unfair. And then they cancelled the meeting.
Okay.
Because 85% of all of the facts that I presented came from government agencies.
Right.
And when I pointed that out, they all scattered. Because you know why? Because they had the same thing you talked about, the heady effect. They were full of the heady effect. Nobody was interested in the facts. Nobody was interested in the truth of it. Or the weaknesses of it, or the inevitability of it. And the inevitability of this was flagged for generations by the work of an economist in Chicago called Howard Minsky. And he was known as the bubble boy, and he wrote extensively about bubbles coming and collapsing and starting again, and the lessons forgotten until it just keeps repeating in a slightly different way, but it's the same behavior all the time.
I'm totally out of my understanding, and there's so much stuff you've said, and there's so much stuff I haven't stopped and said, huh? What? Can you explain that? As if I was a 4-year-old. But in particular...
Can I explain one thing?
Yes.
Can I explain one thing to you, which I think is very important, because it was a question you asked earlier on. Why? What's behind all this? Why? It makes no sense. Why would people do this? And the best answer that I've come up with is actually in the work of Professor David Hughes in his book, which is a free book online called The War for Technocracy. And it was the first time that it made sense to me. And that was that for hundreds of years, a small number of families on both sides of the Atlantic have made the wealth of Croesus, like Rockefeller would be one, Rothschilds would be another. And there's a whole bunch of them, there's a couple of hundred of them. And they've made absolute fortunes. Bill Gates is in that same is in the same category. They've made tens and tens of billions, and in some cases we just don't know. But it's running into massive power, massive amounts of money, and the world is completely upside down in terms of the distribution of wealth. And they know because they've access to all of the planners and brains to beat the band. They know that the French Revolution is coming inevitably to their door, because that's how humans operate, and there'll be a great leveling, and they want to get ahead of it, and so therefore.
I know what you mean, Eddie. It's interesting. Just at that, it describes almost alcoholism, because they say that an alcoholic only mends his or her ways, but they have to hit rock bottom. So it's almost like that. That's what happens. Like the inequity has to be so bad, things have to get so bad that finally the previously compliant population just think, fuck this. And like you say, revolutions happen or something happens.
So the next question then, David, if you stay with that thought, the next thought then you should put in your head is, well, how can you stop that from happening?
Exactly. So what?
And then you come to the answer. You have to be able to control the world population. And you do that by establishing global technocracies.
Right.
Places like the World Health Organization and the United Nations and the World Economic Forum.
Yes, you will own nothing and you will be happy.
Yes, and then you weaponize.
Yeah.
You weaponize NGOs in every country so that they're under your control, and they then exist in a policy. They create a policy bubble around national parliaments.
Jesus,
And
Eddie, if I don't know, if I was in that position, I think I'd be a good dictator. Oh, I don't know.
Just let Eddie finish.
No, sorry, Eddie.
So there was an attempt to land that technocracy. It's all there. It's in black and white. People just don't want to engage because of cognitive dissonance. People don't want to engage. It's such enormous. You're asking me to. I'm just asking people. Don't listen to what I'm saying. Just go and look at it yourself. It's all there in black and white. It's openly in front of people's eyes. They just don't want to engage with it.
Well, I'll tell you why they don't want to engage with it. I mean, I'll tell you why. I'll tell you for the reason I don't like engaging in it. Anybody who has that much power, I mean, like I can't. I have no power personally. But what I do, I think like most people, you just want to figure out a way to create enough wealth where you can survive and you can provide for your family and go on holiday once a year or something. And I think sorry, go on.
The problem with that is that they're at war with you, but you don't recognize it.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. They're at war with us or me, and I don't recognize it. But yeah. Also, okay. You see,
Can I just nail on an actual
yes,
practical, clear statement on that? The World Health Organization attempted to land a pandemic agreement and changes to their regulations in June 2024, which would have meant that an unelected group of people had unilateral power to declare health emergencies and global health emergencies anywhere in the world, giving them complete authority to declare it over human health, animal health, plant health, and ecosystems. And they came within a hair's breadth of being given that power. That's what nearly happened, and they're coming back to try and complete the job. And that would then mean that the United States, the EU, and all the other countries would be bound in by international treaty, which was their attempt to come under this global technocracy. Then sitting in the wings, these are all facts, sitting in the wings are attempts to introduce digital IDs. The digital ID then will contain your vaccine passport, well, for all the future pandemics that they will make up, your vaccine passport. It will contain your personal carbon limit, because that's the plan of the UNIPCC. That's the green agenda. And it will contain your central bank digital currency, which means they have control over your spending. Now, you tell me why that isn't a prison.
Yeah, it's hard for me to figure it out and process it, but I know that as humans we have these instincts to dominate, control, and also be controlled, and but I don't know. I mean, I guess do some of this, like how sure are you that you're right in as
I'm right. I'm absolutely, well, I can tell
like
you
would
that
you
I'm
bet would you bet all
absolutely-
your would you bet your money everything on everything you're saying?
I'm,
There's no doubt.
well, I'm here. I'm here and I'm saying it. I've lectured on it. I'm writing on it.
Yeah.
I'm talking about it. So yeah, I'm pretty committed to it. Am I right on the WHO? Absolutely.
Yeah.
What about digital
Yeah.
ID, interbank digital currency, and the vaccine passports? They're plans, but they're being openly discussed. They just haven't arrived yet.
But we're
And
sort
at
of,
some stage-
But Eddie, I just think, like David,
But don't
he's
we-
mildly interested. People are not interested. They don't want to hear. That's what
I
really.
know that.
But there's like
I'm aware of that.
some amount. But luckily, I think there's a small amount of people who are emotionally engaged and they willing to actually do something about this. Have a protest. Go round, educate people.
But Hannah, it's easier. It's actually more simple than that. What has to happen is that people wake up and suddenly and just withdraw your permission. I do not give you permission. I am not giving up my freedom for your rules. Just no, I'm not doing it.
And I know it's hard
more
because
people-
I just want to say that, I said no to vaccine and I experienced at work the hostility and being called a spreader and, and you do have to have some sort of resistance to that and not give in.
Well, can I just interject there? And I'm mindful of the fact that we've got 1 minute and 30 seconds. I was kind of ambivalent, I think, towards the vaccine scene. I didn't see it as a conspiracy. I didn't see.
It's not a conspiracy.
Sorry,
it's,
I didn't see.
It's a method to
I didn't
control
see,
us.
Okay, but the thing that resonated with me in terms of how Hannah reacted, because I know how deeply Hannah loves her 2 sons, and she's very protective and nurturing and has that incredible maternal instinct. And so you just weren't sure about
I wasn't
them being
sure.
vaccinated.
I knew that the vaccine is wrong.
But that's why
it's not tested.
Okay,
It's not.
okay. Anyway.
So it's poison.
So, Eddie, we're less than a minute. We're going to wrap this up. And the connection has been, personally for me and my ADHD, absolutely torturous. But it's been such an absolute pleasure. I mean, really. And I'd love at some point when we get connections fixed to do this again.
Thank you, Eddie.
Okay, no problem.
Thank you
All right,
so much, Eddie.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you.
That's all. Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Well, there were so many other questions, like
I know, but we can't. This is ridiculous.
And then he wanted to talk about what we have. When
Daniel,
we talk
do you
before
want to just do this?
Ask another
I know, but
question.
I mean,
Will I do the outro?
Oh, fuck it. It doesn't matter. Go on. Just.
Yeah, maybe.
No, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
We're gone.
That's yeah. We have to find out a better way, so maybe it's not broken or.
No, this is torture.
Yeah, okay.
No, I'll put it in myself, Daniel.
Okay.